Welcome to 99 zu 1. Willkommen zu 99 zu 1. My name is Nadim. I'm a bit sick, as if you can hear. My voice is not the best, but thankfully I don't have to talk that much because we invited Michael Roberts again to talk about tariffs and the US economy. Welcome back, Michael. It's been a while.
Well, thank you, Nadim, for inviting me again. Yes, I'm pleased to be back in these difficult times. Hopefully we can try to cover some of the items and issues involved to explain to viewers where we think things are going.
Yeah, difficult times indeed. Very crazy times. And one part of that has been, let's say, Trump's behavior regarding tariffs and his ideas about how to save the US economy. So a couple of months ago, he came out with his so-called Liberation Day, where he announced with a lot of fanfare that he would be taxing half the world like never before, or actually like at least like not like a century before.
Living penguins on an island, in uninhabited island off Australia, they've got to pay tariffs.
Exactly, the poor penguins. Yeah, they were probably gonna stop exporting now. Yeah. So maybe we can take this a little bit from scratch. Is this recent paper of yours in your blog. Everybody should follow the blog, by the way. You should also get this book from Michael, The Long Depression. That's the book that we also did an interview on the last time Michael was here. We can recommend this wholeheartedly. Also, before we start, let me just say a couple of words for everybody who doesn't know Michael. Michael worked in the city of London as an economist for over 40 years. And he closely observes, also in his blog, you can follow that, the machinations of global capitalism from within the dragon's den, as we say Britain is. At the same time, he was a political activist in the labor movement for decades. And since retiring, he has written several books. The Great Recession is one of them, The Long Depression I just showed. There's also one about Engels and one about Marx, 200 years, I think. I also have that here somewhere.
But also last year was Capitalism in the 21st Century, which I did jointly with Guglielmo Carcadi.
Carcadi, exactly. I have this down here too.
We should try and follow that up because it updates a lot of things that have happened in the last 10 years.
All right. I don't have that one yet. I will definitely follow up on this. And yeah, as I said, numerous papers like this one here. You can follow him on his blog. We'll put the link in the description down here. Okay, so maybe let's start from scratch. Michael, why is Trump tariffing half the world? What does he want to achieve with that?
Well, he claims that America is losing ground with the rest of the world. It's failing to be the dominant economic and political power in the world. It's losing ground, all the fault of previous administrations, particularly democratic ones, that have allowed basically Europe, China, Asia, all the other countries to cheat America. America is being cheated. It's running a big trade deficit. It's selling less abroad than it's importing from these countries. These countries are making America look stupid. American households are being forced to buy cheap Chinese goods or other things instead of good American goods. And that means American industry and American economy is being weakened severely. So the solution to this cheating program, which the Democrats have allowed to happen as well, Trump says, is to introduce tariffs. And he returns to his hero of the 1890s, President McKinley, the great tariff man. They're called the Napoleon of protection at the time. And the idea that McKinley had in the 1890s was to slap tariffs on the rest of the world, and this will help to protect American industry so that they can gain production and gain a bigger share of the world market. So he wants to revert. He sees tariffs as a solution to this problem, which he's posed, the rest of the world cheating, and that it will make America great again, MAGA. So it's one of his big principles for making America great again. The other one is to cut taxes to the rich so that they can invest more, and to cut back on completely unnecessary government spending on things like climate control, energy, and so on. And in the latest budget he's just got through, there'll be huge cuts in Medicare for the poorest people in America who don't have a proper health service anyway. and also food stamps and food aid is being cut. So this is his program. So the aim is that tariffs is somehow a massive solution to America's failing superiority in world markets.
And then he's kind of flip-flopped around it, because he came out with these tariffs first, and then a couple of days later he relativized all of this, especially the ones towards China. He lowered them, or he started talking about we need to renegotiate. So what happened there? Like, it sounded on Liberation Day, it sounded like he was so sure that's how he's going to save the economy, and then he backtracked on quite a few.
Well, viewers should take into account two things. First of all, clearly Trump is a bit of a lunatic. I mean, he is not putting forward a rational, coherent policy at all times. Anybody who listens to his TV broadcasts, his tweets, and various other things can realize that this is a man who is either suffering from an increasing level of dementia, or is so egoistically built up in his psychology that anything he blurts out he believes in, and will go on lying or misrepresenting it as long as possible. But having said that, he also thinks himself as a deal maker. And his father was a big real estate broker. By the way, Trump didn't make his money from the bottom. He had a pile of money given to him by his father, and then he's done basically real estate investments for the last 20 years before he became a TV show host. I mean, how many leaders in the world are came from TV show hosts? It's getting worse all the time. So he sees himself as some sort of egoistic, brilliant hero. By the way, he considers that he's probably the best golfer in the world. Things like this. All this attitude. But he sees himself as a deal maker, which means what do real estate people do? They make an aggressive bid, and then they withdraw the bid, and then they try to threaten people with it, and finally come up with some sort of deal which allows the process to go through. And that's what's happening here. He launches out with a big, huge tariffs. He's going to make China pay not just 45% extra tariffs, but 145% if the Chinese don't agree to it. Then he drops it all and lets the Chinese carry on as before for a while these deals go on. And now we've reached here on August the 7th, a latest level. I think we're more or less getting where we're going to be after all this up and down. And now basically everybody all the other countries in the world that are exporting things to the US will pay 15% extra tariffs than they were paying before. On the whole, that seems to be the average. Some will pay more because there are specific things that he wants to attack, or he's trying to force them into some sort of trade deal, which which will mean, in his eyes, the answer is if we get a trade deal, then all these other countries will have to promise not to send us any more goods, but actually invest in America, build factories and services in America, so that it gives America jobs and so on. That's what he says will come out of these trade deals. Take the European one, for example, Nadim, the latest one. The European Union has agreed to a 15% tariffs on all their exports without anything coming the other way around, no retaliation. And they've also apparently agreed, according to Trump, to $600 billion worth of investment in the US, which Trump said the other day, well, I'll be looking after that 600 billion. I haven't decided where I am going to spend it yet. And so this money is going to just be handed over to him in a check or a bank transfer, when of course it is totally ridiculous. All that the EU has agreed to is they've agreed that they will ask manufacturing companies and European manufacturers and other companies to consider investing more in the US. They have no power to. We live in a capitalist system. The European Union governments can't tell companies in Europe where they should invest. All they can do is ask them. And anyway, the European Union can't tell 27 governments what to do. This has not been agreed, this trade deal, by the 27 governments. So it's nonsense. It's just more of the approach by which Trump adopts, which is make a deal, claim it's a success, claim we've won, and tell the American people that things are going to be so way better as a result of the deals I'm making on trade. But now we're clearly clear that trade tariffs are going to be up something like 20% above where they were before, which means either this will feed through to prices in America for households in the goods that they buy that are imported, or and also into the components that American manufacturers and companies have to import to do something. For example, if you take the iPhone is 95% produced outside of the US. So the idea that Trump has proposed it, that the whole of iPhone components should be made in America, all the components, so that nothing, it's just inconceivable. And if it can't be done, then it means, and these tariffs are imposed on China and other countries that providing these iPhone components, then there's going to be a massive increase in the cost of iPhones feeding through to American households, because the Apple will have to raise its prices because the components will be so much more expensive. So this is where we've reached as of August 2025.
Yeah, I mean, he was even proposing his Trump phone. I think that was last year or something like this. And the funny thing about this was that even the Trump phone was built like in 27 different countries. Yes. So it was not a very MAGA phone.
Trump doesn't want to accept the idea that we have a global economy now,
right?
Massive transfers and transactions through a global supply value chain takes place across the world. This is the result of globalization, in particular over the last 40 years. Countries do not produce all their own things at home anymore. Quite the contrary, everything is traded and transferred and transported. Volkswagen, all the components of Volkswagen are coming out from all different parts of the world to produce the final car, particularly China and also within other countries in Europe. This is the way global capitalism operates. That cannot be reversed. It's an illusion to imagine it. And it's also detrimental to people that it should be reversed. The whole point of the division of labor on a global scale and trading in this way is actually, it does lower transaction costs and improves efficiency and productivity. This will be a disastrous reversion, which can't be achieved, but that's what Trump claims he's going to do, at least for the US.
I mean, even if one were to think this through and we would say like, okay, he builds like the whole industry that is needed to build a like freaking iPhone in the US, the unit labor costs would be so immensely higher than what you would build, for example, in China and Taiwan and all these countries that take part in this. That would mean that the production of the phone would be much more expensive. So,
well, I saw a figure the other day estimated that iPhones, if it was actually possible to do it all in the US, with the US labor, which it isn't, but if it was, it would increase the current iPhone price by 6 times. So over to you, those who are holding up iPhone. That's what, of course, Trump will deny this. His argument is that such will be the increase of American industry and production as a result of the protection measures as the Napoleon protection, then we will get a massive increase in incomes for American workers, and they will be able to eventually build all these things themselves, and the problem will be solved. It's only a matter of time. In the meantime, it's necessary to turn things upside down in order to re-establish American superiority in the world. By the way, just to add, Nadim, all this is protection on manufacturing goods. There's no extra tariffs on services like insurance, films, software, all that sort of stuff, which America is still one of the leaders in. They're not going to have, there's no tariffs on that. So the service sector of international trade continues. Apparently, it's all just to do with goods, which is a somewhat ridiculous thing when the service sector is now 20% of all international trade.
Yeah. So the also how you explain it now, when you know, maybe let's talk about, before we go into the next question, let's talk about the options that the manufacturers that are currently importing stuff from the US, from other countries other than the US. What options do they have now to deal with those tariffs? Because what you just described, at least, hasn't happened yet. The iPhone isn't yet 6,000 euros, $6,000 or something like this. It's still the old price. So why didn't they pass on the extra prices? Because it's already going since a couple of months.
This is true. This is one of the big arguments of the Trump and MAGA supporters. They say, well, where are the increased prices, they say. This is, it's not true. It's not happening. Well, there are 2 reasons for that. And also a contradiction. It's not true that prices aren't increasing. They have inflation in the US is gradually moving up, particularly in these goods areas which require a lot of imported components and so on.
It's above 2% again.
Yeah, well, the aim of the Federal Reserve in the US is to get inflation down to 2%. Before, when Trump came into office in January, it was around about 2.5%. It's now heading back towards 3%. So, and that's only after a few months. The other reason is that the tariffs really haven't hit yet, because he kept changing how much it was going to be. Then he paused it, and then he changed these policies for different countries. Then they're going to be exempt on this, and then they're going to be tariffed on that, and so on. So there's a bit of a uncertainty about it, just exactly how much extra tariffs people exporting into the US would have to pay. So a lot of that hasn't fed through yet to components, prices, and so on. And also what happened was, as soon as it became clear that Trump was going to go out on this tariff war, a lot of companies bought loads of stuff that they need in advance for their inventories and their components and so on. I was reading only yesterday that one company, small company, not just the big ones, small company bought 1 year's supply of what they needed in advance. And they obviously had to take out a loan to do that and everything. But that means that they bought it without the tariffs coming in order to avoid the increase in costs that are going to come through. So that's meant, particularly in the first quarter of this year, we saw a very sharp fall in, we saw a big increase in, not very big increase in exports, but a very big increase in imports, as people imported all the stuff from abroad before the tariffs came through and stocked it all up. In the second quarter of this year, that's begun to alter. Imports have dropped quite sharply because the tariffs are now beginning to operate. I think in the second half of this year, we will see a significant increase in costs for manufacturers in the US and feeding through to households. We'll see that inflation rate rise. But Trump and his people, they deny that. That's not going to happen. The second half of this year is going to be a fantastic success for the US economy.
Yeah, just like he doesn't believe official numbers coming in, I think a couple of days ago.
Well, yes, just to say on that, but we have every month the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is the American Statistical Agency, publishes figures for how many jobs there are in the US economy and how they've increased. So each month over the last few years, they've been increasing at a few 100,000 a month because the population rises, immigration's been coming in, there's an expansion of the need for jobs. Unemployment's been relatively low, at least on the official figures, so jobs have increased. But in the past half a year, and certainly in the past 3 months, job increases have fallen quite sharply. Now, what's happened is that initially the Bureau of Labor Statistics gives you an initial estimate of what the jobs increase is, and then later on it revises it because it gets more information. How does it find out? Well, it asks companies whether they've taken on any people. Not all these companies reply, so they have to make a guess at what it is. And what we've found is that the initial estimates look very good. Trump was fairly happy, quite reasonable, actually still slowing, but reasonable figures. And then the Bureau announced, well, actually, my latest estimates, now we've got more information, the last 2 months were not anywhere near as high. And this month is terrible. We're down to maybe about 70,000 was the latest figure. In the whole of the country, there's only been an increase of 70,000 jobs. So Trump was absolutely enraged by this, claiming it was a fix, it was rigged, there was a Democratic Bureau lab head behind it all, and this person, who's a woman, was immediately sacked. And apparently Trump can just sack people. There doesn't seem to be any way to stop him. So now there is no head of the Bureau. Somebody will be appointed who will give us better figures, Trump-type figures from the future.
Yeah, let's see about that. He's also been threatening to sack the head of the Federal Reserve Bank. So
yes, well, the Federal Reserve, you see, says Federal Reserve's worried about the inflation, which we've just been talking about, rising. And the idea of central banks is they think they can control inflation by raising interest rates.
Raising interest rates, yeah.
I don't think it works, but that's what they think. And therefore, these thinking Jay Powell, is the head of the Federal Reserve, and his other committee members, on the whole, think it's better to keep rates where they are because inflation's moving up. But Trump's worried about the slowdown in the economy. He wants interest rates cut as far as possible. And if they don't cut it, then it's Jay Powell's a complete idiot. I'm going to remove him and replace him with somebody who will cut interest rates. It reminds me, I don't know if probably know more, that in Turkey, President Erdogan followed a similar policy, that when the central bank said, look, you've got high inflation in Turkey, very high inflation, 40, 50%. We need to keep interest rates high to drive down that inflation. Erdogan would sack one central bank governor after another and insist on interest rates being reduced. This actually just added to more inflation in the end, because there was absolutely just that spending continued at a high level because of low borrowing costs, and it wasn't producing things. So that's the risk that the Federal Reserve worry about. On the other hand, they also worry about the fact that there's unemployment's rising, employment's going down. So we have what I would like to call, viewers, is what used to be called stagflation in the 1970s. So you've got an economy slowing down towards zero, but you've still got inflation rising. So it's stagnation plus inflation. That's the sort of US economy that we're heading to the end of this year. It could be worse, but it's certainly heading towards that stagflation situation. And that's a disaster, because the Federal Reserve doesn't know what to do, whether to raise rates, hold rates, or lower rates. And Trump will be screaming blue murder that everybody's fixing the figures and the data and not acting in his interests.
Wouldn't a sacking of the Federal Reserve Bank president, wouldn't that also signal to international investors that invest in government bonds and stuff like this, that the security that is the dollar is being relativized there? Like, isn't the Fed exactly built for that reason, in order to also project some kind of confidence to outside investors? And wouldn't that be detrimental to actually like start sacking the Fed guy and put some other guy in there? That just,
I think it will. I mean, there is the US dollar is the most important currency in the world. It's used by all the central banks of the world as mainly as their reserve currency. So countries build up reserves. Maybe if they export more than they import, or they get a lot of investment coming in, and if they don't spend it all, it ends up in reserves in the central bank, and they're mainly kept in dollars. How do you keep them in dollars? Well, central banks buy short-term bills from the US Treasury, 1 month, 3 months, which is almost like having cash, but they get a bit of interest on it. So they build up these reserves. And so they've got a lot of dollars. Now, if the Federal Reserve Bank chief is sacked, the Bureau of Labor Statistics chief is sacked, then people begin to worry, well, just is the American, how do I know what's going on in the American economy? How can I, this is really dangerous for keeping our money in US dollars as US assets. And so maybe we should look to find other assets that are not US dollars. That's not easy for other countries. They maybe look at the euro, they maybe look at the yen, but it's not really an alternative. They maybe buy some more gold, that's also true, but there's not much of that. There's even been talk of buying cryptocurrencies, stable coins rather than dollars. I personally think all those things are not going to work, but what it does mean is that the dollar is uncertain currency to hold now. It's going to be weakened. It weakens the position of the American dominance in international financial markets if the dollar weakens. So he's creating that situation. But having said that, we still have to remember that basically people can't hold anything but dollars on the whole. And also the American economy appears, up to now, a more interesting investment to make rather than Europe, which is a shambles, or Japan, which is stagnating. So there's still a lot of demand to invest into the US, and therefore to take dollar assets to do so. That may start to disappear now, we shall see over the next 6 months to a year.
Right. So when he came out with these tariffs and he started this this policy, or let's say when he made it real, because I've been talking about this for quite a while already, when he made it actually real, there were a lot of worries from all kinds of analysts all over the world, but especially in the US, saying that this will tank the economy. The government bonds were also dropping sharply in the very first weeks. I remember that's when I observed this a bit. So there was a big worry that's it. Like the United States economy now will get hit. When one looks at the United States stock market index, though, the top 500 companies, one actually sees a sharp rise in their value, accumulated at least, highest by far than anything else in the last 5 years, with a sharp drop, of course, at the beginning of 2025, but then it recovered quickly. So how do you explain this?
Well, I think it was total exaggeration to assume that the US economy was going down a hole just when on those tariffs are increased, and that was partly induced by the shock of the tariff increase and uncertainty about it. But what we've seen is actually, as you pointed out, the US stock market is at record highs. There's been quite a large investment into the US, and we know what's behind this. Behind this, the stock market is only at record highs because of 7 big companies in the US, which are all those ones that we all know, the big tech giants, the AI are driven now. They're spending huge amounts of money on artificial intelligence, building big data centers across America.
Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Meta, Nvidia, these guys.
And then Nvidia, which is the big chip company.
Right.
These are all, the only one that's not spending any money in this area, by the way, is Apple, because they're still relying on their old services. They're not convinced that they need to go into AI big time. But all the others are spending huge amounts of money on, massive amounts of money on this, with the prospect that they will get massive returns and profits and control the artificial market worldwide in the future, and the US therefore, in this period of expansion of investment, this is helping the US dollar to stay up. The real fear for the US dollar and also for the US economy is that this is really just a huge bubble. There's huge investment going in, borrowing of huge amounts of money, and it won't actually return in terms of revenues and profits over the next period for these big AI companies. They're convinced that it will. They say that they can, doesn't matter if China's got a cheap AI model like DeepSeek, we can match that, but we're going to produce super intelligent artificial intelligence models. That means more intelligent than you and me, and of course that is a very high level of intelligence, therefore it's going to replace human beings completely, and that then these companies will be in a completely monopoly position to rule the world. We shall see whether superintelligence actually delivers. I don't know what the viewers think if they've tried all the current AI models, ChatGPT or any of the others, whether they feel that they're really reliable, efficient, and do change things and make things easier for them to do their work at the moment. Companies are still hoping so, but always say the current take-up of AI by companies across the US is about 4 to 5% of all companies taking it up in some way and spending money on it.
Yeah, paying for it. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Pays for it. Yeah.
With ChatGPT, they've got 500 million users. Wow. But only 3% of them actually pay anything. I don't pay anything if I use ChatGPT.
No, of course. Yeah.
I use the simple one for the basic things. But obviously companies are looking for more, like getting rid of call centers and never talking to any human being at all. Everything will be done by AI. We'll be able to summarize all our services and our projects using AI and so on. Well, we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's also the question whether such cheap services like a call center, that's not one of the most important and most expensive operations in a business, can actually bring this kind of growth that they are expecting. Okay. Let's see about that. Okay, so what you're saying basically is that this the stock rise is due to the good performance of stock of these big IT companies or AI companies.
Yeah, the rest are not getting very little.
How about the rest? So what is going on with them?
The rest are getting very little profit. The profit figures I just saw the other day from FactSet, which is a sort of US agency that measures these things, we're talking about 2 or 3% growth in the profit rate on average for all the other key companies in the S&P 500. That's the top 500 companies in the US stock market. We're talking about 7 or 10 companies that are making all the profits, and therefore their prices are up. The rest of them are making virtually none at all. And there's probably something between 20 to 30%, it's difficult to estimate, who are actually losing money. They're losing money on a regular basis. And how do they survive? They keep borrowing more from the banks, and that's the way they can continue. These companies are called zombie companies, in a sort of cheap way of putting it, that they don't die, They just carry on, but they don't make any money, and they don't invest, and they don't are not able to increase and expand at all. They just sit there as a dead weight on the economy. So that's the real state of the majority of the US economy. And remember, Nadim, the US economy is the best. It's the best of the G7. I mean, if we move on to Europe, I mean, that's another subject altogether. But what a shambles that Europe's in at the moment, particularly Germany, and that's way the US is there looks quite good against Europe and the rest of the G7 and Japan. Of course, it doesn't look so good against the really fast-growing economies, particularly China, and that's what worries it the most. Now, all this is about not just US superiority over Europe and Asia. It's in the end, what this is about is a struggle between US trying to maintain its economic, financial, and military hegemony over China, which they see as the major rival that has appeared in the last 20 or 30 years and has staggeringly launched itself towards being at least the manufacturing power of the world, and possibly also now competing in these technologies that we've been talking about in a sufficient way, and therefore threatening the very basis of American capitalism over the next generation.
I want to get to China and also to Europe in a second, but maybe let's stay one more moment with the US, because what you already said now, that the manufacturing sector basically in the US is not seeing high profit rates at all, and no real increase there. What's the effect on employment? We already talked about, but maybe what's the effect on the wages of people there? So basically, ultimately, when you're manufacturing something, you also need someone to buy it. How does this look in the US?
Well, if you exclude the supervisors in companies, factories, but also exclude the tech people at the top end in these markets, in these sectors, information sector and so on. If you exclude that section of the employment, which is not small, but it's not big, majority of ordinary workers in factories and service companies, leisure, hospitality, health, government, manufacturing, all those sectors that spread across the US economy, average wages after inflation, so average real wages, we say economists, have more or less been flat for the last, well, since the Great Recession. There was ups and downs, but if certainly if you go up to the beginning of COVID and now 2020, and now here we are in 2025, they have had little or no growth at all. So basically people's living standards with their families and so on, most people in America both have to work, male and female parents have to work mostly, or they might even have more than one job, because a lot of part-time work in the US, not a lot of full-time work. People, the figures get worse on that. So their wages are not rising. They're not rising in real terms and have not been for some time. And so people they're living on the weekly paycheck or the monthly paycheck, hand to mouth. There's hardly any savings going on. This is the situation for the whole swathe of American households. Yes, they have a higher standard of living than, say, most of the rest of the world, but it's not improving. And in many ways, it's falling. And of course, above all else, Nadim, the inequalities of wealth and income in the US are staggeringly high. And we talk about the tech giants and their trillions of dollars of wealth. And we remember that virtually most American households have no real wealth at all once they've paid off their debts and mortgages. And they might have a car and they might have maybe a house, but that's it. They don't have anything else. They don't have any savings, pensions money, all the rest of it. They don't know prospect if they retire that they're going to have a good life either. This is the situation for one of the greatest capitalist economies in the world. And we can only see that relatively when we look at the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's our idol. That's how we want to become, right? But I mean, now let's put these together. We have something that you call the bubble. I mean, we will see if this bubble will burst or not, but it sounds to me, yes, I'm also from IT, it sounds to me that there will be a burst at some point. Then we have all these manufacturing companies that in order to sustain their low profitability are taking up a lot of loans or loan-like things, you know, getting some kind of liquidity from somewhere to survive. At the same time, we have basically no buying power in the, or very little buying power in the population, and they also take out loans in order to, I don't know, finance their houses and stuff like that.
Pay for their student debt and
student debt, exactly. Yeah. So now the bubble bursts. Are we looking at another 2007, 2008 here?
Well, it's certainly possible. I think I've always looked at it from what I call Marxist point of view. What do Marxists think about economies? Well, Marxists start off with what's the state of profits, because capitalist economy expands production and services. Capitalists only do that if they're going to make a profit out of doing it. They don't produce things that people need just for the sake of that people need. That would be a socialist society. What we're talking about is a capitalist one. So capitalists will produce things people need, but only if it makes a profit. So what's happening with profits is key, because if profits go up, then capitalists will invest more, they'll employ more, and people's incomes will probably rise to some extent, if not as much as profits. If profits go down, then the opposite is the case. Investment will stop, employment will fall, unemployment will rise, and you can enter what economists call a recession or a slump. So what's the situation in the US economy? Well, as I said, a lot of companies are not making much profit now, but it's still the case that profits are not going down on the whole, on average, yet. That may change over the next couple of quarters. And so until we see a significant fall in corporate profits, or profits in general, in the US economy, we can't expect investment to totally collapse and therefore unemployment to rise. That's the normal way in which you see capitalism develop. It has a boom, then profits fall away, then investment collapses and you go into a slump. That knocks off a lot of companies that can't survive, these zombie companies, and a lot of workers get laid off. And that means that the rest of those who are left can make more profits because they haven't got so many competitors and they've reduced their costs, and the cycle goes up again. So you have a cycle of boom and slump. That's the way that Marxists see capitalist system working. In the book you referred to, The Long Depression, I make the point that actually since the Great Recession, that hasn't really even happened properly. It's generally been a depressed environment. Profitability stayed down, growth has crawled along, investments crawled along. It hasn't really gone up and down. And we've had subsequent to that book, which was about the Great Recession of 2008, of 9, if you like, we've had the COVID slump, which was very severe, if short-lived. So I think it's every possible likelihood that we will have another slump in the major capitalist economies before the end of this decade. Maybe earlier than that. It's difficult to judge. But it's clear that there's no particular pickup, no boom going on, which will transform that picture. And as you pointed out, I'm not convinced that AI is going to provide that boost to productivity, which will create conditions for capitalists to suddenly improve their profitability and go forward. That doesn't mean to say AI is not going to disappear. It's not going to disappear. It's going to become a new technology which can improve productivity. But I can't necessarily see that it's going to make massive profits for American companies and others. We shall see.
Last question for this would be, as the book already states, and you just explained also, yeah, it's like the booms are not really happening anymore, right? So we might still see some kind of fluctuation, but it's really on a depressed level.
Yeah.
Still, it seems like the US is managing to maintain this depressed level without, facing major consequences that challenge their whole system of, especially international dominance. So my question would be, why are they? Is it precisely because everybody still wants the dollar and they're the only big player in town that they can basically just trot along like this, and there is no real competition to chase them off the market? Or why is it that they are able to survive in such a depressed state for so long?
Well, it's all relative. That's the way I put it. If you take the period back before 2007, before the Great Recession, if you take the period, say, from the mid-1990s up to 2007, the average growth rate in the major capitalist economies, the economies of the North, the so-called G7, Europe, Japan, North America, they were growing at about 3% a year. Previously, back in the 60s, they used to grow at 4 or 5% a year. But in that period of 1990s and early 2000s, they were going at 3% a year, which was good enough to keep income per head to rise because population growth wasn't matching that. But after the Great Recession, we've seen the growth rates for these countries fall back to something like 2.5% or even less in the case of the G7 economies. But within those G7 economies, the US has been growing better. It's been growing at, say, 2.5, while Europe at 1% or 1.5 at best, probably even lower now. Germany's not growing at all. Japan 1%. So there's a relative gap there. So if American economy does worse than it did 15 years ago, but relatively better than the other countries, then there's obviously a transfer of funding towards the dollar as opposed to the euro, the yen, and the other currencies. But you'd also have to say that why is it the case that the US is doing better? Well, I think the answer to that is a number of things. First of all, they have financial dominance in the world, so they're able to direct financial resources to American companies. And those companies have bought large sections of the rest of the world. I mean, in the UK, I live in the UK, private equity, which is investing by financial companies into companies that are operating services and production, it's massive. We have a massive, and most of that private equity is coming from America. So America's making a lot of money by having invested abroad through private equity and through manufacturing directly, and remitting those profits back to the States. So it's a huge, it adds something like 1 to 1.5% to US GDP every year, the repatriation of the investments that it gets abroad. The return they're getting on that is also falling, so the gap, the relative advantage they have is declining. So there we have it. The US economy does a bit better, even domestically, than the rest of the world, because it's got key industries where it's invested, where it can take advantage of that. Europe is well behind, and Japan has been stagnating for 20 years.
Okay, so then let's talk about the other player in the house, and let's get to China, because obviously their growth has also been slowing, but it's still at considerably higher levels. I think something around 5 or 6 right now %. And yeah, I mean, it's clearly stated this is not a conspiracy theory. China is the object of the US's wrath regarding those tariffs. That's at least how Trump explained himself. And now they kind of came out with a deal. We'll talk about the deal in a second. But first question would be, as to my knowledge, the American and the Chinese economy, they are so intertwined. There is so much stuff that the US indeed buys from China, imports from China, but also vice versa. China is kind of relying on this market. The question really becomes, is there even, like, does Trump even have cards to play, how you would say, in order to force China to a table for some kind of different deal?
Well, the irony of this is that back in the 1990s, when China was starting to take off with its manufacturing, through investment in manufacturing, and through huge foreign investment, all the companies of the West were going in there. Volkswagen is still there, huge investor in China. This was seen as what was called a virtuous circle. These investments would lead to, with all the global North companies shifting into the global South to get cheap labor, China in particular. They would produce cheap goods that could be imported back, and when all our costs would go down for households at home. So they would benefit by getting increased exports and revenues coming in, and the rest of the world, the advanced world, will get cheaper goods. This was a perfect world of globalization. But what happened was that China, one of the few countries in the global South who did this, hardly anybody else did it, maybe you could call Korea and Taiwan, but they're relatively small, actually started to develop its own independent manufacturing base. And it through massive state investment, and also because it didn't let foreign companies control 50% of the operations, always less than 50%. And because they learned the technologies of these companies, they were able to start building their own state-financed companies, which just became world leaders, increasingly so around the world. And in the year 2001, they were able to join the World Trade Organization, which meant they were no longer faced with tariffs by exporting their goods into America and to Europe, very low tariffs. And so they made massive increases in production. Now, China has 35% of the world's manufacturing production. It is the dominant trading force in manufacturing. And more, this was the most worrying thing for the Americans and for the international elite in the West, was it now was starting to compete not just in producing toys and fabrics and all the things that, you know, when you look at the thing you've bought, it's got says it made in China on, but technology, high value technology, exactly, high value technology, which is culminated now in artificial intelligence competition and so on. This is the real backbreaker, game breaker for American imperialism and for the rest of Europe. It means that they can no longer be dominant if China can pass that. And China is continuing to grow. Yes, as you say, Nadine, growth rates have fallen from the 8, 9, 10%. During the Great Recession of 2008-9, when most economies of the world fell by 2 or 3% in GDP, absolutely, China went up by 8, 9%. And this,
yeah, they took over the production of the world, basically.
They did, and they have had no slump. They've had no slumps. It doesn't exist in China. Lots of Western economists spend all their time attacking China, saying it's about to collapse and all the rest. It's got too much debt. It's not allowing households to consume more, and therefore it's going to collapse. This is, in my view, personal view, nonsense. China is still growing at 5% a year. Then the next argument is all these are all lies. These figures are fixed, like the Bureau of Labor Statistics are fixed in America. Not true. Lots of new surveys done by American economists and official bodies show that the Chinese figures are reasonably accurate, no worse than anybody else's. And that therefore, China is growing at something like 4 times faster than Europe and at least double, if not 3 times faster than the US every year. So that is the real threat that the Americans, the Europeans see. And now that's using Trump's MAGA protectionist ideas to apply to China big time, not just on exports, but Europe's trying to cut out everything that they buy from China. They've already cut out everything from Russia. Now they want to do it with China, technology and everything. This is a big problem for lots of European companies. I mean, Volkswagen has massive investments in China. It's a place where it can actually make a big return because of Chinese expertise and the value added that they can gain by exporting out of China. So this is going to be a big contradiction between the attempt to crush China, strangle its economic development, and at the same time preserve the gains that they've made by investing in China over the last 20, 30 years.
So let's talk about this. At least it's a temporary deal they came up with, some agreement. At least I think it's for 60 days or something. Maybe I'm wrong. What like did he gain something out of this move with China? What did they end up with?
Well, so far I don't think it's not resolved. I think, I mean, we'll see. But first of all, it was going to be China was going to get 45% tariffs compared to everybody else's 15 or 20 because they were the nastiest of all. They were cheating the most. So they had to be dealt with. Then he said, no, well, we'll have a deal first. We'll have a deal soon. So we won't impose the 45%. And then Trump said, well, actually, China's just been threatening us with retaliatory tariffs. China's the only country that said, okay, we'll put tariffs on your stuff. We won't let you have all our rare earth minerals, which you require for all your technology. And we won't import any more of your soya beans, which you normally get. We'll go to Brazil. We'll find somebody else to get it. And so on. So and then Trump said, well, you're also cheating. China's putting it through Vietnam or through Mexico, getting its stuff in without paying the same tariffs. So we're going to put 145% tariffs on. And that was it. And then within days, he said, well, the Chinese are talking. So we'll take that off and we'll pause. So we're in a pause. So we have the deal making going on. Trump's threatening all kinds of things. The Chinese are either ignoring him or waiting quietly and to see what will eventually come out of it. So at the moment, we just had today or yesterday the announcements of the new range of tariffs for everybody else. But China's is paused for another 30 days while he still tries to get a deal. So what we've learned from this is that while the EU was quite happy to just bow the knee to Trump when he visited Ursula the other week, the Chinese are doing nothing. They're not offering anything at the moment. And I've worked out, well, not me, just only, but other people have worked out that the cost, say these tariffs go ahead at the levels which Trump is talking about, the cost to China will be something like losing 1% of GDP on their growth rate. So if they're growing at 4 or 5, it'll go down to 4, maybe 3, if it's applied permanently for the rest of this decade. The US will go down by 1%, if not more, as a result of doing that. They're growing at what, 2%, under 2%? So basically, the US will be close to being in recession if it allows these tariffs to be applied to China, because China is such a big exporter of many goods into the US. And China's US exports are not a big percentage of China's economy. They export everywhere. So they can do movements into other areas, Europe, Japan, and so on, or to go around the circle and find other ways to export. So it's not, yes, it's damaging to the Chinese economy, but it is just as damaging to the US if these tariffs are imposed. And everything comes in. Just think about it. We don't have free trade anymore, so we're not expanding trade. Everything is turning inwards. It's cruel. It's being reduced across the globe. Everybody will lose out from this process of protectionism, just as they did in the 1930s.
Okay, and then last but not least, let's talk about the European Union. I mean, it's true, you said they bent the knee. It's quite remarkable because, I mean, when I read those news about the so-called deal, I mean, as far as I understand, it's not completely finished yet. It's not signed. And of course, the other countries have to kind of agree to it too. But basically what was proposed there as a deal was that the US gets everything they wanted. The European Union gets absolutely nothing they wanted. So, you know, higher tariffs, like you said, a dedication to invest hundreds of billions of euros in the US. And this was kind of sold to us here in the news as, yeah, we made a great deal. So maybe because Trump was threatening higher tariffs or something like this. So now this becomes interesting. Why would the European Union bow to this like that? I mean, fold maybe in some way and, you know, bow to it in some way. Okay, but get something out of the deal for you. They got nothing. So why would they do this?
Well, I think you can take two reasons, but somewhat contradictory. The first reason would be that actually the deal's not 15% tariff and a promise to invest in the US at some figure. How that's to be done is not really explained. Is really not that bad.
No big deal, yeah.
The tariffs have gone up anyway, so 50% tariffs is not significantly making a difference to European Union exports into the US. And there's no real incentive to pile a load of manufacturing companies into the US to employ Americans at higher rates to produce something that won't make any profit. So that's one argument. So you could say, okay, Ursula bent her knee, but it doesn't make any difference because nothing's really going to come of this that will damage the European economy. Maybe that's not correct. The other reason is that certainly from the point of view of the EU and some of the EU leaders, they are totally committed to preserving the American-led alliance in the world against what they see as the dangerous enemies to European liberal democracy, Russia under Putin, and further down the road, Xi under China, and Iran in the Middle East. So the American idea that they have to smash these resistant powers, and the European leaders' idea that they have to basically reduce Russia down to the level of a vassal state of Europe, breaking it up into bits. I think that was the position of the Latvian Prime Minister. That is their, as it were, vision for saving Europe. They don't care about European workers, what's happening to them and their jobs and the investment of European companies. They have this huge imperialist vision that Europe's got to play a role as a junior partner with America in achieving the control of the world for so-called liberal democracy. So there are two viewpoints here, that the deal doesn't make a lot of difference. And anyway, we just want to curry favor with Trump and America and make sure that the alliance continues and that we can win the war in Ukraine, which we will never give up fighting for.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't think actually those are so contradictory, because in the end, if they know that the deal is not such a big deal for them, Trump might still take it as a win and be happy about it. So that's maybe what they want to cater to when they at the same time want to ask him to stay involved in the Ukraine. And to some extent, I mean, I don't have the direct connection, but to some extent it worked, because since a long time, Trump has been saying that he doesn't want to invest more money and more weapons in the Ukraine, and that actually changed in the last weeks. So, if you want to bind the US to be there for you as your junior partner, like you said, it makes sense to not get the big guy angry there. So
no, let's play it cool.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think Ursula can be regarded as a cool person. I think I think it's more that as far as the civil servants. I mean, Ursula von der Leyen is a civil servant,
obedient.
Although she acts as though she's the emperor of the Union. But she just. That's the position of the Commission. The Commission says that we can manage this deal. And the position of the politicians is we have to have a deal because we have to keep America on board for our great struggle for liberal democracy. So the two things, as you say, in a way, come together.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, Michael, thanks a lot for the talk. The paper we discussed, but we discussed much more, but the paper that we discussed was Tariffs and the US Economy. You can find this on Michael's blog. I'll put the link in the description. The outlook is that in the next 6 months, we might see some changes regarding, or some output regarding those tariffs, and maybe we'll have you on again to discuss what we watch, what we will get to observe then. So thanks for being here, Michael, and hope to have you back soon. Okay.
Thanks for having me, Nadi. Correct.
See you. Bye-bye.
Leute, wir brauchen eure Hilfe. Wenn euch dieses Video gefallen hat, klickt auf Like, abonniert den Kanal und vergesst nicht, das Glöckchen zu drücken, damit ihr benachrichtigt werdet, wenn wir neuen Content droppen.
Außerdem solltet ihr uns überall folgen, wo wir verfügbar sind. Das ist Facebook, Instagram, Twitter und Twitch. Und wenn wir irgendwelche Ankündigungen machen oder Posts, dann shared, was das Zeug hält. Gebt uns all eure Liebe.
Wir haben mittlerweile ziemlich signifikante Kosten. Wenn ihr es euch irgendwie leisten könnt, unterstützt uns doch auf Patreon. Dann kommt ihr auch in den Genuss verschiedener Vorteile, wie zum Beispiel Zugang zu unserer Discord-Community oder Zugang zu den ultrageheimen Patreon-Episoden, die wir dort posten. Außerdem könnt ihr uns natürlich auch über PayPal Spenden zukommen lassen.
Außerdem haben wir mittlerweile einen eigenen Online-Shop. Das heißt, wenn ihr euch immer noch fragt, was ihr euren Lieben zu Weihnachten, Ostern oder sonst wie schenken könnt, geht dorthin und kauft duftes Merch.
Alle Links dazu hier in der Beschreibung oder auch auf unserer Webseite 99zu1.de.
Vielen Dank fürs Dabeisein, danke für die Unterstützung und wir sehen uns in diesem Theater.